Rebecca Chen had always believed that actions spoke louder than words. As the CEO of First National Bank, she made it a point to practice what she preached. That Tuesday morning started like any other, with Rebecca participating in the annual charity marathon that her bank sponsored. She had crossed the finish line feeling accomplished, her face flushed with pride and exhaustion. The call came just as she was catching her breath. Her daughter's school needed an immediate payment for a field trip that was leaving that afternoon. The amount was substantial, and Rebecca realized she needed to make a quick stop at the bank to withdraw the cash. She glanced at her watch and saw she had just enough time before the school's deadline. Still wearing her running clothes and sneakers, Rebecca drove to the nearest branch of her own bank. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail and her workout clothes were damp with sweat. She grabbed her purse and hurried inside, not thinking twice about her appearance. After all, this was her bank, and she just needed a simple transaction. The branch was moderately busy with the usual lunch crowd. Rebecca walked up to the first available teller, a young woman who looked to be in her early 20s. The teller had perfectly styled hair and wore the standard bank uniform with a name tag that read, Kelly. "Good afternoon," Rebecca said with a friendly smile, pulling out her debit card. "I need to withdraw $1,500, please." Kelly looked up from her computer screen, and Rebecca noticed the slight frown that crossed her face as she took in Rebecca's appearance. The teller's eyes moved from Rebecca's sweaty forehead down to her running shoes, and her expression grew skeptical. "I'll need to see some identification," Kelly said, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been with the previous customer. "Of course," Rebecca replied, fishing her driver's license from her wallet. She handed it over along with her debit card, still maintaining her pleasant demeanor. Kelly examined the ID carefully, holding it up to the light and comparing the photo to Rebecca's current appearance. The process seemed to take longer than usual, and Rebecca could see other customers in line behind her getting impatient. "The photo looks different," Kelly said finally. "And this is a pretty large amount you're requesting." Rebecca was surprised by the comment but remained calm. "I just came from a charity run, so I'm a bit disheveled. The photo is recent, though. Is there a problem?" "We have to be careful about fraud," Kelly replied, still holding the ID. "Do you have any other forms of identification?" Rebecca opened her wallet wider and pulled out her credit cards and her business cards. She handed over another form of ID and her company credit card. "Will these help?" Kelly examined each item with the same suspicious intensity. She typed something into her computer, waited, then typed again. Her frown deepened as she looked back at Rebecca. "I'm going to need you to wait here for a moment," Kelly said, standing up from her station. "I need to verify some information." Rebecca watched as Kelly walked over to a colleague at the next window. They spoke in hushed tones, both glancing back at Rebecca periodically. She began to feel uncomfortable as she noticed other customers starting to stare. The conversation between the tellers seemed to go on forever. Kelly returned to her station and sat down, but instead of processing the transaction, she picked up the phone. Rebecca could hear her speaking to someone, though she couldn't make out all the words. She caught phrases like suspicious customer and large withdrawal and doesn't match the photo. "Excuse me," Rebecca said, leaning forward slightly. "Is there an issue with my account?" "We're just following standard security procedures," Kelly replied without looking up from her computer. "You'll need to wait." Rebecca felt her patience beginning to wear thin, but she reminded herself that security measures were important. She had implemented many of these procedures herself. However, she was also aware that there was a difference between being thorough and being unnecessarily difficult. A few minutes later, a security guard approached the teller window. He was a large man with a stern expression, and his presence immediately drew the attention of everyone in the lobby. Rebecca felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as conversations around the branch stopped and all eyes turned to her. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside, please," the security guard said in a voice loud enough for half the branch to hear. "Step aside?" Rebecca repeated, genuinely confused. "I'm just trying to make a withdrawal from my own account." "That's what we're trying to verify," Kelly interjected. "Your identification doesn't seem to match our records, and the amount you're requesting raises some red flags." Rebecca felt a mix of disbelief and growing anger. She looked around the branch and saw customers whispering to each other and pointing in her direction. Some had their phones out, and she worried they might be recording the situation. "I assure you there's been some mistake," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm a long-time customer of this bank and I've never had any issues before." The security guard crossed his arms. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me to discuss this privately." "Privately?" Rebecca's voice rose slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. "All I want to do is withdraw money from my own account. I've provided multiple forms of identification. What exactly is the problem here?" "The problem," Kelly said with a tone that suggested she was losing patience, "is that people try to scam the system every day. Your story about being at a charity run is convenient, but we can't just take your word for it." Rebecca stared at the young teller in amazement. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Here she was, being accused of trying to defraud her own bank by an employee who didn't recognize her own CEO. She had spent years building this institution's reputation and implementing customer service standards that were supposed to balance security with respect for customers. "I understand you need to be careful," Rebecca said slowly, "but I think this situation has gotten out of hand. Perhaps I could speak with your manager." Kelly and the security guard exchanged glances. "The manager is very busy right now," Kelly replied. "He doesn't have time to deal with every customer complaint." The dismissive tone in Kelly's voice was the final straw. Rebecca had heard enough. She looked around the branch with new eyes, seeing not just her employees but the culture that had apparently developed in her absence. The other customers were still watching the drama unfold, some with sympathy, but others with suspicion. Rebecca made a decision in that moment. Instead of revealing who she was right away, she would see how far this would go. She wanted to understand exactly what her customers experienced and what kind of training her employees had received. This was turning into an unexpected but valuable learning opportunity. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll wait for the manager." Rebecca stood to the side of the teller window, feeling like a criminal in her own establishment. The security guard remained nearby, his presence making the situation even more uncomfortable. She checked her phone and realized that 20 minutes had already passed since she'd first approached the counter. Her daughter's school deadline was getting closer, and her frustration was mounting. Other customers continued to glance in her direction as they conducted their business. Rebecca overheard snippets of their conversations, and it was clear that word was spreading about the suspicious woman who was trying to withdraw a large sum of money. She felt humiliated but also curious about how her own bank handled these situations. Kelly had returned to helping other customers, occasionally shooting glances at Rebecca as if she might try to make a run for it. The young teller seemed almost proud of herself for catching what she believed to be a potential fraud attempt. Each time she looked over, Rebecca could see the satisfaction in her eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a man in his 40s approached. He wore a dark suit and had the confident walk of someone in management. His name tag identified him as David, branch manager. Rebecca felt a sense of relief, thinking that surely someone in his position would be more reasonable and professional. "I understand there's been some confusion," David said, but his tone was far from apologetic. He looked Rebecca up and down, taking in her athletic wear and slightly disheveled appearance with obvious disapproval. "Yes, there has been," Rebecca replied, maintaining her composure. "I'm trying to make a simple withdrawal from my account, and your staff has treated me like a criminal." David crossed his arms and adopted a stern expression. "Ma'am, we take security very seriously here. When someone comes in looking like," he paused, gesturing at her outfit, "well, like they've been sleeping rough and asks for a large sum of money, we have to be cautious." Rebecca's mouth fell open slightly. Had he really just suggested she looked homeless? The insult was so outrageous that for a moment she was speechless. She looked down at her running clothes and sneakers, then back at the manager. Yes, she was dressed casually, but she was clean and presentable. More importantly, she had provided valid identification and banking information. "I explained to your teller that I just finished participating in a charity marathon," Rebecca said, her voice tight with controlled anger. I have multiple forms of ID and I'm requesting money from my own account. I fail to see how my appearance is relevant to this transaction. Anyone can say they were at a charity event, David Reppy lied dismissively. And anyone can get fake IDs made these days. We've seen it all before. Rebecca felt her patience evaporating. Then perhaps you could verify my identity by asking me personal questions about the account or checking my transaction history, or using any of the other verification methods that banks typically employ. David shook his head. That's not how we do things here. If you can't provide adequate proof of identity, then we can't help you. I'd suggest you come back during normal business hours when you're properly dressed and have brought additional documentation. Normal business hours? Rebecca repeated incredulously. It's 1:30 in the afternoon. This is normal business hours. Well, when you're dressed appropriately and have made an appointment, David clarified, his tone becoming more condescending. We can't just drop everything because someone walks in off the street making demands. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. The customer service standards she had worked so hard to implement seemed to have disappeared entirely. Worse yet, the attitudes she was witnessing went against everything her bank claimed to stand for in its mission statement and advertising campaigns. I'd like to file a complaint about this treatment, Rebecca said firmly. David actually laughed. A complaint? Ma'am, you're the one who came in here looking suspicious and making unreasonable requests. If anyone should be filing a complaint, it's us. You're disrupting our business and wasting our time. The conversation was attracting more attention from customers and staff alike. Rebecca noticed that some of the other employees had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation. She wondered if this was typical behavior for this branch or if she was witnessing something unusual. I'm not being unreasonable, Rebecca said, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to stay calm. I'm a customer trying to access my own money. This is supposed to be a service business. Listen, lady, David said, stepping closer and lowering his voice but keeping it loud enough for others to hear. I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but it's not going to work here. We've dealt with people like you before. People like her. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications of his words. Was he making assumptions about her based on her appearance? Her ethnicity? Her gender? She thought about the diversity and inclusion training that all bank employees were supposed to receive, and wondered if this manager had ever attended a single session. What exactly do you mean by people like me? Rebecca asked, her voice dangerously quiet. David seemed to realize he might have stepped over a line, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. People who come in here trying to take advantage of the system. People who think they can intimidate us into giving them money without proper verification. Rebecca looked around the branch with fresh eyes. She noticed things she hadn't paid attention to before. The way some customers were treated with warmth and others with suspicion. The lack of privacy during transactions. The outdated posters on the walls that hadn't been changed in months. The general atmosphere of hostility, rather than helpfulness. You know what? Rebecca said quietly. I think I'm beginning to understand something here. Understand what? David asked, his tone still confrontational. I'm understanding exactly what kind of culture exists in this branch, Rebecca replied, and I'm understanding why customer satisfaction scores have been declining. David's expression shifted slightly. How do you know about customer satisfaction scores? Rebecca smiled for the first time since the ordeal began, but it wasn't a friendly smile. I know a lot of things. More than you might imagine. She pulled out her phone and began typing. David watched nervously as she seemed to be documenting the conversation. Other customers had stopped pretending not to listen and were now openly watching the exchange. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to put that phone away, David said. Taking pictures or videos in the bank is against policy. Actually, Rebecca said, still typing, I'm not taking pictures. I'm just making some notes about my experience here today. Is that against policy too? David seemed unsure how to respond. He looked toward Kelly, who was watching the situation with growing concern. The security guard had moved closer again, as if preparing for the situation to escalate further. Look, David said, his tone slightly less aggressive. "Why don't you just come back tomorrow with proper identification, and we can sort this all out?" "Tomorrow?" Rebecca asked. "You want me to come back tomorrow to access my own money from my own account at my own bank?" David's eyes narrowed. "Your own bank? Lady, you don't own anything here. This is First National Bank, and if you don't like our procedures, you're free to take your business elsewhere." Rebecca felt a surge of anger so intense that she had to take a deep breath before responding. Her own bank. If only he knew. She looked at David's confident, dismissive expression and realized that he genuinely believed he was in complete control of this situation. "You're absolutely right," Rebecca said finally. "This is First National Bank, and you're right about something else too. I think it's time for some changes around here." The cryptic nature of her response seemed to unsettle David, but before he could ask what she meant, Rebecca turned and walked toward the customer seating area. She had seen enough, heard enough, and experienced enough. It was time to make some phone calls. Rebecca settled into one of the cushioned chairs in the customer waiting area, her phone in hand, but she didn't make any calls just yet. Instead, she decided to observe. She had been given an unexpected opportunity to see her bank through the eyes of an ordinary customer, and she wasn't going to waste it. From her new vantage point, she could see the entire operation of the branch. The main teller area was busy with the afternoon rush, and she watched carefully as different employees interacted with various customers. What she saw troubled her deeply. An elderly gentleman approached one of the tellers with what appeared to be a pension check. The teller, a middle-aged woman, seemed annoyed by the man's questions about his account balance. She spoke to him as if he were a child, using a loud, slow voice that drew uncomfortable stares from other customers. When the man asked her to repeat the balance, she rolled her eyes and sighed dramatically. Rebecca made a mental note. Customer service training clearly needed to be revamped, particularly around treating elderly customers with dignity and respect. At another window, a young mother with 2 small children was trying to open a savings account. The children were being remarkably well behaved, but the teller kept shooting annoyed glances at them whenever they moved or made any sound. When one of the children dropped a toy, the teller made a comment about how some people shouldn't bring kids to the bank. Rebecca felt her jaw clench. The bank's family-friendly policies existed for a reason, and employees were supposed to be welcoming to customers with children. She continued watching as a well-dressed businessman approached David's office. The transformation in the manager's demeanor was striking. Gone was the confrontational attitude he had displayed with Rebecca. Instead, he was all smiles and deference, practically falling over himself to accommodate the man's requests. The double standard was obvious and infuriating. Apparently respectful treatment at this branch was reserved for customers who looked a certain way or met certain unspoken criteria. Rebecca opened the Notepad app on her phone and began documenting what she was witnessing. She noted the time, the employee involved, and the nature of each interaction she observed. The pattern that emerged was deeply concerning. Kelly, the teller who had started this whole ordeal, was particularly problematic. Rebecca watched as she processed transactions for several customers, and her attitude varied dramatically based on her apparent assessment of each person's worthiness. Young professionals received friendly service and helpful information about bank products. Older customers and those dressed more casually were treated with barely concealed impatience. When a woman in work clothes approached Kelly's window, Rebecca paid especially close attention. The customer was clearly coming straight from a job that involved manual labor, and her hands showed the evidence of hard work. She needed to cash a paycheck and make a deposit. Kelly's reaction was immediate and negative. She examined the woman's ID with unnecessary scrutiny and made comments about the cleanliness of the check. When the woman asked about the bank's savings programs, Kelly dismissed her with a curt, "Those products aren't really for people in your situation." Rebecca was appalled. Not only was Kelly being discriminatory, but she was also failing to offer appropriate banking services to a customer who clearly needed them. It went against every principle of inclusive banking that Rebecca had worked to establish. She looked around the branch more carefully, noticing details she had missed before. The marketing materials displayed were outdated by at least 6 months. The customer information pamphlets were poorly organized and many were out of stock. The seating area where she was sitting had several chairs with torn upholstery and stained cushions, but the physical condition of the branch was less concerning than the attitudes of the staff. Rebecca realized that somehow a culture of judgment and exclusion had devilly upped in this location. Employees seemed to have appointed themselves as gatekeepers, deciding which customers deserved good service based on their own biases and assumptions. A commotion near the entrance caught her attention. An immigrant family had entered the bank, and Rebecca could see them speaking to each other in what sounded like Spanish. They approached one of the teller windows, and immediately Rebecca could see the teller's body language become defensive. The family's English was accented but perfectly clear, yet the teller spoke to them slowly and loudly, as if they were deaf or intellectually impaired. When they asked about opening a business account, the teller told them they would need to bring someone who speaks English to help them understand the paperwork. Rebecca felt sick to her stomach. The bank had specific policies about language assistance and cultural sensitivity, and this employee was violating all of them. Worse, the family was clearly embarrassed and hurt by the treatment they were receiving. She stood up and began walking, slowly around the branch, observing from different angles. Near the offices, she could hear David on a phone call. His voice carried, and she caught fragments of his conversation. "Yeah, we had some crazy woman in here earlier trying to scam us," he was saying. "Looked like she hadn't showered in days and wanted $1,500. These people think we're idiots." Rebecca stopped walking. These people. There it was again. That same language that suggested he viewed certain customers as inherently suspicious or unworthy. She continued her circuit of the branch and noticed a bulletin board near the back that was supposed to display employee information and bank policies. Most of the papers were months out of date, and several important policy updates that had been distributed company-wide were nowhere to be seen. Rebecca checked her phone and realized she had been observing for over an hour. In that time, she had witnessed multiple instances of poor customer service, discriminatory behavior, and policy violations. This wasn't just a case of a few bad employees having an off day. This was systemic. She thought about the other branches in her network and wondered if similar problems existed elsewhere. This experience was opening her eyes to issues that the executive reports and customer surveys weren't capturing. When customers were treated badly, many of them simply left and never came back, rather than filing formal complaints. As she was processing all of this, she noticed that Kelly kept glancing over at her with concern. The young teller seemed nervous about Rebecca's continued presence in the branch. She had spoken to David several times, and Rebecca could see them both looking in her direction. Rebecca decided to test something. She walked back toward the teller area and got in line again, this time behind a well-dressed woman who was making a large deposit. She watched as Kelly processed the transaction with efficiency and warmth, offering information about investment options and thanking the customer repeatedly for her business. When it was Rebecca's turn, Kelly's demeanor immediately shifted back to suspicion and hostility. "You're back," Kelly said, as if Rebecca's presence was an insult. "Yes, I'm back," Rebecca replied calmly. "I'm still hoping to make that withdrawal." "And I already told you that we can't help you without proper verification," Kelly snapped. "I don't know why you're still hanging around here." Rebecca smiled, slightly. "I'm hanging around because I'm learning a lot. This has been very educational." Kelly frowned, clearly confused by Rebecca's response. "Educational? What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Rebecca said, her voice calm but carrying an undertone that made Kelly shift uncomfortably, "that I'm getting a very clear picture of how this branch operates, and I think it's time for that to change." Before Kelly could respond, Rebecca walked away again. She had seen enough. It was time to reveal who she really was and start fixing the problems she had discovered. But first, she wanted to make one more phone call. Rebecca returned to the seating area and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for her executive assistant, Lisa. It was time to set some things in motion. "Lisa, it's me," Rebecca said when the call connected. I need you to do something immediately. Of course, Rebecca. What do you need? I want you to call the Riverside branch and tell them I'll be conducting an impromptu staff meeting in 1 hour. Everyone who's currently working needs to be there. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Everyone, including customers? The branch will need to close for the meeting, Rebecca said firmly. This is urgent. Should I tell them what it's about? Rebecca glanced toward the teller area, where Kelly was still shooting nervous looks in her direction. Just tell them that there are some policy issues that need immediate attention. And Lisa, I want you to send someone from HR to meet me here as well. I'll take care of it right away, Lisa replied. Is everything all right? It will be, Rebecca said. But we have some serious problems to address. After ending the call, Rebecca remained seated and continued observing. Word seemed to be spreading among the staff that something unusual was happening. She could see employees whispering to each other and stealing glances at her. David emerged from his office several times, looking increasingly agitated. About 20 minutes later, Rebecca's phone rang. It was Lisa calling back. I've arranged everything, Lisa reported. The staff meeting is set and Jennifer from HR is on her way. But Rebecca, the branch manager, sounds very upset. He's demanding to know why you're closing the branch and who authorized it. Rebecca almost smiled. Did you tell him? I told him the instructions came directly from the CEO's office and that all questions would be answered at the meeting. Perfect. Thank you, Lisa. Rebecca ended the call and decided it was time for the next phase of her plan. She stood up and walked directly to David's office. The door was open and she could see him at his desk, frantically typing on his computer. Excuse me, Rebecca said, stepping into the doorway. David looked up and his expression immediately became hostile. You again? I thought I made it clear that we can't help you today. Actually, I think there's been a misunderstanding, Rebecca said, stepping into the office uninvited. I'm not here for customer service anymore. David's frown deepened. Then why are you here, and why are you in my office? Instead of answering, Rebecca reached into her purse and pulled out her business cards. She selected one and placed it on David's desk right in front of him. David glanced down at the card and Rebecca watched as his eyes widened and the color drained from his face. He picked up the card with trembling fingers, read it again, then looked up at Rebecca with an expression of pure horror. He started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Rebecca Chen, Chief Executive Officer, First National Bank, Rebecca said calmly. I believe we've met. David's mouth opened and closed several times without any sound coming out. He looked at the card again, then at Rebecca, as if hoping this was some kind of elaborate joke. I don't understand, he finally managed to say. You said you were trying to make a withdrawal. I was trying to make a withdrawal, Rebecca confirmed, from my own bank, as a customer. And I have to say, the experience has been very enlightening. David stood up so quickly that his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Miss Chen, I had no idea. If I had known who you were, you would have treated me differently, Rebecca finished. Yes, I'm sure you would have, and that's exactly the problem. David's face had gone from pale to red. I can explain. We have strict security protocols, and when someone comes in looking, we have to be careful about what, David? Rebecca asked, her voice dangerously quiet. About people who don't look the way you think bank customers should look. About people who aren't dressed to your standards. About people whose appearance you find suspicious. No, that's not what I meant, David stammered. But Rebecca could see in his eyes that it was exactly what he meant. Do you remember what you said to me about an hour ago? Rebecca asked. You told me to come back when I was properly dressed, and during normal business hours. You suggested I looked like I had been sleeping rough. You said you dealt with people like me before. Each quoted phrase hit David like a physical blow. He sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. And then, Rebecca continued, when I was sitting in your customer area, I heard you on the phone describing me as a crazy woman who looked like she hadn't showered in days. You referred to these people as if customers like me were inherently problematic. David looked up with tears in his eyes. Ms. Chen, please, I can explain. I was just trying to protect the bank's interests. I was following protocol. Whose protocol? Rebecca asked sharply. Show me the bank policy that says customers should be judged by their appearance. Show me the training manual that teaches employees to treat people differently based on how they're dressed. David couldn't respond, because no such policies existed. In fact, Rebecca knew that the bank's actual policies explicitly prohibited the kind of discriminatory behavior she had witnessed. A knock on the office door interrupted the conversation. Kelly appeared in the doorway looking nervous. Mr. Patterson, there's someone here from corporate HR asking for you, Kelly said. And there are some announcements about closing early for a staff meeting. David's face went even paler if that was possible. Kelly, I'd like you to meet Ms. Chen. Kelly looked confused. Ms. Chen? Rebecca turned toward the young teller with a calm expression. Hello, Kelly. I believe we've met several times today. I'm Rebecca Chen, the CEO of this bank. Kelly's reaction was even more dramatic than David's had been. She actually stumbled backward and had to grab the doorframe for support. The withdrawal. Yes, I was trying to make a withdrawal from my own account at my own bank, Rebecca said. And you accused me of running a scam, called security on me, and treated me like a criminal. Kelly's mouth moved, but no words came out. She looked desperately at David as if hoping he could somehow fix this situation. But he was staring at his desk, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Both of you need to understand something, Rebecca said, her voice carrying the authority of her position for the first time that day. What happened here today wasn't just about me. I sat in that lobby for over an hour and watched both of you, along with other staff members, treat customers with disrespect, discrimination, and outright hostility. She turned to Kelly. I watched you dismiss an elderly customer, make inappropriate comments about children, and tell a hard-working woman that our banking products weren't for people in her situation. I watched you treat an immigrant family like they were stupid because of their accents. Kelly was crying now, but Rebecca wasn't finished. And David, I heard you make similar disparaging comments about multiple customers. You've created a culture in this branch that goes against everything this bank stands for. David finally looked up. What? What happens now? Rebecca checked her watch. Now we have a staff meeting, and after that, we start fixing these problems immediately. The sound of voices in the main lobby indicated that other staff members were gathering for the meeting. Rebecca could see through the office window that Jennifer from HR had arrived and was speaking with several employees. Both of you need to join that meeting, Rebecca said. And you need to understand that what happens next depends entirely on your willingness to acknowledge these problems and commit to real change. As Kelly and David slowly made their way toward the lobby, Rebecca remained in the office for a moment longer. She was angry, disappointed, and frustrated, but she was also determined. This branch was going to change, starting today. Rebecca walked into the main lobby where the entire branch staff had gathered. She could see the confusion and anxiety on their faces as they tried to understand why their branch was closing early for an emergency meeting. Jennifer from HR stood near the entrance, her professional demeanor masking what Rebecca knew must be curiosity about the urgent summons. Thank you all for gathering on such short notice, Rebecca began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. I'm Rebecca Chen, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of First National Bank. A murmur went through the small crowd. Several employees looked surprised while others seemed to be putting pieces together. Rebecca could see Kelly wiping tears from her eyes and David staring at the floor. I want to tell you about my experience in this branch today, Rebecca continued. I came in around 1 o'clock to make a simple withdrawal. I was dressed casually because I had just finished running in a charity marathon that our bank sponsors. What happened next was completely unacceptable. She proceeded to describe the events of the afternoon in detail, from Kelly's initial suspicion to David's dismissive and discriminatory comments. As she spoke, she could see the shock and horror on the faces of the employees who hadn't been directly involved. But that wasn't the end of my education today, Rebecca said. I spent over an hour observing this branch in operation, and what I saw deeply troubled me. I witnessed elderly customers being treated with impatience and condescension. I saw families, with children made to feel unwelcome. I watched an immigrant family being spoken to as if they were intellectually impaired because of their accents. The room was completely silent now. Rebecca could see several employees shifting uncomfortably as they recognized their own behaviors in her descriptions. I saw customers being judged and treated differently based on their appearance, their age, their apparent socioeconomic status, and their ethnicity. Rebecca continued. This isn't just poor customer service. This is discrimination, and it violates both our bank's policies and federal law. Jennifer from HR stepped forward with a tablet in hand, ready to document whatever decisions Rebecca was about to make. Kelly, Rebecca said, turning toward the young teller, your behavior today was completely unacceptable. You profiled me based on my appearance, refused to process a legitimate transaction despite valid identification, called security on a customer who posed no threat, and then spent the rest of the day treating other customers with similar bias and disrespect. Kelly was sobbing now, but Rebecca felt no sympathy. Your employment with First National Bank is terminated immediately. Jennifer will handle the paperwork. Gasps echoed through the room. Several employees looked shocked that Rebecca would fire someone so quickly, but she wasn't finished. David, she continued, turning to the branch manager. Your behavior was even worse because you're in a leadership position. You endorsed and escalated the discriminatory treatment I received. You made assumptions about me based on my appearance and spoke about customers in derogatory terms. Most importantly, you've clearly fostered a culture in this branch that allows discrimination to flourish. David looked up with desperate eyes. Ms. Chen, please, I have a family. I can't lose this job. You should have thought about that before. You created a hostile environment for our customers. Rebecca replied firmly. You're being demoted from branch manager and transferred to another location where you'll work under close supervision. Consider yourself lucky that you're keeping a job at all. She turned to address the rest of the staff. I want to be clear that what happened here today is unacceptable and will not be tolerated anywhere in our organization. However, I also believe in second chances for people who are willing to learn and change. Rebecca looked around the room, making eye contact with each remaining employee. Over the next month, every single one of you will go through intensive customer service and anti-discrimination training. You'll learn about unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and the proper way to treat all customers with dignity and respect. She paused to let that sink in. Additionally, we're implementing new policies in this branch immediately. There will be regular mystery shoppers to evaluate customer service. Customer feedback forms will be prominently displayed and regularly reviewed, and I will be making unannounced visits to ensure these changes are being implemented. Rebecca noticed a young man near the back of the group who had been nodding along with her comments. She remembered seeing him earlier in the day when he had tried to diffuse a tense situation between a colleague and an elderly customer. Michael, she said, reading his name tag. Step forward, please. The young man looked nervous but approached. Yes, ma'am? I observed you today trying to help when you saw a customer being treated poorly. That shows good instincts and integrity. You're being promoted to interim branch manager while we search for a permanent replacement. Michael's eyes widened in surprise. Thank you, Ms. Chen. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Rebecca replied. Jennifer will work with you to understand the new expectations and responsibilities. Rebecca turned back to the group. I want all of you to understand something important. This bank serves everyone in this community. We don't get to decide who deserves good service based on how they look or how they're dressed. Every person who walks through those doors is a potential customer who deserves to be treated with respect. She gestured toward the marketing materials on the walls. We advertise ourselves as a community bank that values diversity and inclusion. Today I learned that in this branch, those were just empty words. That changes now. Jennifer had been taking notes throughout the meeting and now stepped forward. Ms. Chen, what about the customers who were mistreated today? Should we reach out to them? Absolutely, Rebecca replied. I want personal apology letters sent to every customer who was treated poorly, along with information about the changes we're implementing. For the family that was discriminated against because of their accents, I want someone who speaks their language to personally invite them back and help them with whatever banking services they need." She thought for a moment. "And the woman who was told our banking products weren't for her? I want Michael to personally contact her and set up an appointment to review all of our services that might benefit her." Rebecca looked around the room one more time. "Does anyone have questions about these changes or their expectations going forward?" A middle-aged teller raised her hand tentatively. "Ms. Chen, what if we're genuinely concerned about security? How do we balance being welcoming with being careful?" "Excellent question," Rebecca replied. "Security is important, but it should never be based on someone's appearance or personal characteristics. If you have genuine security concerns, they should be based on specific behaviors or circumstances, not on how someone looks or talks." She continued, "We'll be revising our security protocols to make this clear. The training you'll receive will cover appropriate security measures that don't involve discrimination." Another employee asked, "Will there be opportunities for us to give feedback about the changes?" "Yes," Rebecca said. "We want this to be a collaborative process. Michael will hold regular staff meetings where you can discuss challenges and suggest improvements. This is about creating a better workplace for all of you as well as better service for our customers." Rebecca checked her watch. "We're going to reopen the branch now, but with the new expectations in place immediately. Michael, you're in charge. Jennifer will stay to help with the transition and handle the personnel changes." As the employees began to disperse, Rebecca pulled Michael aside. "This is a big responsibility and I have confidence in you. But remember, real change takes time and consistent effort. Don't be afraid to hold people accountable." "I understand. Ms. Chen, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What made you decide to stay and observe instead of just revealing who you were right away?" Rebecca smiled for the first time all day. "Because I learned more about this branch in 2 hours of observation than I would have from months of reports and surveys. Sometimes you have to experience problems firsthand to really understand how to fix them." 3 months later, the Riverside branch had the highest customer satisfaction scores in the entire First National Bank network. The story of Rebecca's experience had become part of the company's training program, reminding all employees that every customer deserves respect regardless of their appearance or circumstances. Kelly found work at a different bank, where she struggled with similar attitude problems until she was eventually let go. David completed his retraining and eventually became a competent employee at his new location, though he never advanced to management again. Michael proved to be an excellent manager, and under his leadership, the branch became known throughout the community as a place where everyone was truly welcome. The incident had taught Rebecca valuable lessons about the importance of staying connected to the day-to-day operations of her business, and she instituted regular unannounced visits to all branches. Most importantly, the changes at the Riverside branch sent a clear message throughout the entire First National Bank organization that discrimination would not be tolerated, and that treating customers with dignity and respect wasn't just a policy, it was a requirement that would be enforced at the highest levels.